Nobody could handle the mafia boss's daughter, not the doctors, not the guards, not the women paid triple to keep her calm. But the moment the trembling child reached for the waitress instead of her father, every enemy watching saw a weakness they could finally exploit. And now someone inside the Poston empire is betting Lori won't make it out alive. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. He walked through the restaurant like a shadow carved from violence and designer suits. David Poston, head of the most feared crime family in the city, moving between tables where conversations died mid-sentence. Tattoos crawled up his neck beneath his collar, each line a story most people prayed never to hear. This was a world of power and precision, where million-dollar deals were negotiated over wine and betrayal, where a single look from him could end careers or lives, and yet there was someone he couldn't control. Beside him, fingers wrapped tight around his pant leg, trembling with every step, was the only person on earth who made him powerless, April Poston. 3 years old, haunted eyes in a cherub's face. A child who hadn't spoken since the night her mother died in an explosion meant for him. That little girl had once been joy itself, laughter in hallways, sticky hands on his face. "Daddy, watch me," echoing through their mansion. Now there was only silence. 8 caregivers had quit. 4 child psychologists had given up. The best trauma specialists in the country had walked away, shaking their heads. She screamed when strangers approached, fought every kindness, and locked herself behind walls no professional could breach. Until one night, this night, something impossible happened. David was headed toward the private dining room in the back, a meeting with the Volkov family that could turn into a war if one word landed wrong. His mind was on ammunition counts and exit strategies. Then he heard it, that sound that stopped his heart every time. A tiny, broken sob. He turned sharply, hand instinctively moving toward the gun beneath his jacket. But someone had already reached April. A waitress. Black vest, crisp white shirt, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, warm brown skin, and eyes that held something David hadn't seen in months. Gentle certainty. Lori Harper. She knelt slowly on the restaurant floor, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she understood that sudden gestures meant danger to a frightened child. From her pocket, she pulled out something small, a folded napkin, shaped into a simple origami flower. Nothing magical, nothing expensive, just kind. She held it out, whispering words David couldn't hear from where he stood frozen. And then, miraculously, impossibly, April reached for it. The sobbing stopped. The waitress's hands, steady and sure, lifted April into her arms. David braced for the scream, the kicking, the panic that came every single time someone tried to hold his daughter. Instead, April tucked her small face into Lori's shoulder, wrapped her arms around the stranger's neck, and went still, peaceful. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. David Poston, a man who'd stared down cartel bosses, who'd negotiated with terrorists, who'd killed without hesitation to protect his empire, stood paralyzed, watching a waitress hold his daughter as if she'd been doing it her entire life. His bodyguard Kozlov stepped forward. "Boss." David raised one hand. "Stop." Lori stood slowly, cradling April against her chest, one hand supporting the child's back, the other gently brushing dark curls away from tear-stained cheeks. She swayed slightly, a natural rocking motion, and began to hum something soft and wordless. April's breathing deepened. Her tiny fists, always clenched, relaxed against Lori's collarbone. Around them, the restaurant had gone silent. Servers stood frozen with trays balanced on their hands. Diners watched with forks halfway to their mouths. Even the kitchen noise seemed muted, as if the universe itself was afraid to shatter this fragile moment. David moved forward, each step measured, until he stood directly in front of the waitress. Up close, he could see the slight tremor in her jaw. She knew who he was, what he represented. Fear flickered behind her eyes, but her arms never wavered. Her hold on April remained steady. "What did you do?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Lori met his gaze, and something in her expression shifted. Not defiance, something older. Understanding, maybe. "I asked if she wanted to see something pretty," she said quietly. Sometimes children just need to know someone sees them, not their fear, them." David stared at her. 6 months of specialists, medications, behavioral therapists, tens of thousands of dollars, reports filled with clinical language and hopeless prognoses, and this waitress with a paper flower had done what none of them could. "She doesn't let anyone hold her. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, as if Lori had somehow cheated the rules of his daughter's trauma. I know. Lori's voice was barely a whisper. I can feel it. She's carrying something too heavy. April shifted slightly, her small hand reaching up to touch Lori's face. A gesture so tender, so trusting, that David felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time April had reached for him like that? When was the last time she'd looked at him without fear? Kozlov cleared his throat behind him. The Volkovs are waiting, boss. We're 10 minutes late. David didn't move. Couldn't. Tell them I'll reschedule. Boss? I said reschedule. The edge in his voice cut through the air. He looked back at Lori, at his daughter sleeping peacefully in a stranger's arms, and made a decision that would change everything. Don't leave, he said. Not until she wakes up. Lori's eyes widened. I have tables. I'll buy the restaurant if I have to. He wasn't joking. What's your name? Lori. Lori Harper. Lori Harper. He repeated it slowly, committing it to memory. Who are you? Lori had never sat in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent. The private dining room was all dark wood and leather, chandeliers casting warm light over a table set for 8. Through the glass walls, she could see the main restaurant servers glancing nervously in her direction, managers whispering behind their hands. And across from her sat David Poston, the man whose name made the evening news, watching his daughter sleep in Lori's arms like she was performing surgery. She hasn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since. He stopped, started again. Since the accident. Lori adjusted April's weight slightly, feeling the child's warm breath against her neck. She'd learned not to correct people when they called tragedies accidents. Sometimes that word was all that kept them standing. How long ago? She asked softly. 6 months. 1 week. 4 days. The precision of his answer broke her heart. David leaned forward, elbows on the table, and for a moment the dangerous man disappeared. What remained was just a father, hollowed out by grief he couldn't fix. Tell me what you did. Exactly. Lori hesitated. How did you explain instinct? I saw she was scared, overwhelmed, so I made myself smaller, slower. I gave her something to focus on that wasn't frightening. The flower. Yes. Something beautiful that couldn't hurt her. Lori looked down at April's face, peaceful in sleep. And I asked permission. Not out loud, but I waited. Let her choose. David's jaw tightened. $60,000 therapists, child trauma specialists from Johns Hopkins. None of them thought to ask permission. They were trying to fix her, Lori said quietly. She doesn't need fixing. She needs... What? Lori met his eyes. To know it's safe to break. The words hung between them. Outside the glass walls, Lori's manager appeared, gesturing frantically. David's bodyguard intercepted him with a hand on his chest and a whispered conversation that ended with the manager backing away quickly. You're costing me my job, Lori said. I'm buying you a better one. David pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. What's your schedule tomorrow? I what? Your schedule. When do you work? Double shift. 11 to close. Cancel it. Lori's arms instinctively tightened around April. Excuse me? I need you to come to my house tomorrow. 2 o'clock. I'll send a car. No. The word came out sharper than intended. David's expression shifted, not anger, but surprise, as if he'd forgotten people could refuse him. No. Mr. Poston, I'm a waitress. I have rent due Friday. I can't just... Name your price. It's not about... 5,000. One afternoon. 3 hours with April. Lori's breath caught. $5,000. That was 4 months of rent, 6 months of groceries. The surgery her mother needed but kept postponing. Why me? She whispered. David looked at his daughter, and something ancient and wounded crossed his face. Because she's sleeping. For the first time in 6 months, my daughter is sleeping, and I don't know if she'll ever do it again if you walk away. A soft sound made them both freeze. April was humming. Not awake, still deep in sleep, but humming the same wordless melody Lori had used earlier, her small voice threading through the quiet like a prayer. David stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. He moved around the table, stopping just inches away, staring down at his daughter as if she'd performed a miracle. His voice cracked. She's making sound. Tears burned Lori's eyes. She'd heard this hum before from her nieces, Mia and Sophie, after their mother died. That soft, searching sound children made when they were trying to remember what safety felt like. She's dreaming, Lori whispered. Somewhere safe, I think. David reached out slowly, his tattooed hand hovering over April's dark curls, not quite touching. Afraid, Lori realized that he'd wake her, that the spell would break. "I can't do this alone," he said, so quietly Lori almost didn't hear. "I've tried. God knows I've tried." But she looks at me and sees the man who couldn't save her mother. "She doesn't think that." "She does." His hand dropped. "Every time I hold her, she goes stiff. Every time I speak, she flinches. My own daughter is terrified of me." Lori understood then. This wasn't about hiring help. This was about a father drowning, reaching for anything that looked like land. "I'll come tomorrow," she heard herself say. 2:00. "But I need you to understand something." David met her eyes. "I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained. I raised my nieces after my sister died. I know what broken looks like because I've lived inside it, but I can't promise I'll fix this. You already did more than anyone else." He pulled a business card from his jacket, wrote something on the back. "My personal number. The address. The gate code. Tell them you're expected." Lori took the card with her free hand, feeling the weight of the decision settle into her bones. April stirred slightly, her small hand curling into Lori's shirt, and whispered something so soft it was barely breath. "Stay." David's entire body went rigid. It was the first word his daughter had spoken in 6 months, and she hadn't said it to him. The gates were black iron, 12 feet high, with cameras tracking Lori's approach before the car even stopped. She'd expected something impressive. What she got was a fortress. The Poston estate, sprawled across what had to be 5 acres, stone walls, manicured gardens, and enough security personnel to staff a small army. Men in dark suits spoke into earpieces, their eyes following her movements with professional suspicion. The driver, silent for the entire 40-minute ride, opened her door without a word. Lori stepped out, suddenly aware of her Target jeans and borrowed cardigan. This was a mistake. She didn't belong in a world with gates and guards and Miss Harper. A woman appeared on the front steps. Late 50s, steel-gray hair pulled back severely, eyes that could cut glass. She wore a crisp white blouse and black slacks like a uniform. "I'm Mrs. Deborah, head of household staff. Mr. Poston is waiting in the East Wing." Her tone made it clear what she thought of waitresses being summoned to the main house. "Follow me." The interior was exactly what Lori expected. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. But something was off. The space felt cold, unlived in, like a museum instead of a home. No toys scattered on the floor, no crayon drawings on the refrigerator, no evidence that a 3-year-old lived here at all. Mrs. Deborah led her through a maze of hallways, past closed doors and watchful staff members, until they reached a room flooded with afternoon light. And there she was, April, sitting on a cream-colored carpet in the center of an enormous playroom, surrounded by toys that looked untouched. Wooden blocks still in their packaging, a dollhouse pristine and empty, stuffed animals arranged in perfect rows, like soldiers. The little girl wore a white dress with pink flowers, her dark curls brushed and held back with clips. She looked like a doll herself, pretty, posed, and utterly lifeless, until she saw Lori. April's head snapped up. Her eyes, those haunted, too old eyes, suddenly blazed with recognition. She stood, stumbled forward, ran. "April, wait." Mrs. Deborah reached out, but the child was already moving, small feet flying across the carpet until she crashed into Lori's legs, tiny arms wrapping tight around her knees. Lori dropped to her knees instantly, gathering April against her chest. The child was trembling. Not crying, just shaking like she'd been holding her breath underwater and finally broke the surface. "Hey, sweetheart. Hey, I'm here." Lori's voice came automatically, the same tone she'd used with Mia and Sophie during their worst nights. "I'm here. You're okay." April burrowed deeper into Lori's shoulder, and that humming started again, soft and desperate, like she was trying to remind herself of something safe. "She's been like this all morning." David's voice came from the doorway. Lori looked up. He stood there in a black t-shirt and jeans, looking somehow more dangerous without the suit. The tattoos on his arms were fully visible now, intricate patterns that told stories she probably didn't want to know. "Like what?" Lori asked, waiting. He moved into the room slowly, sitting by the window, watching the driveway. Mrs. Deborah tried to feed her lunch, and He stopped. She screamed, clawed, wouldn't let anyone near her. Mrs. Deborah's expression was stone. "The child needs professional intervention, Mr. Poston. This attachment to a stranger is unhealthy." She's not a stranger. David's voice could have cut steel. She's the only person April wants, so she stays. The tension in the room was suffocating. Lori focused on April, feeling the child's heartbeat slowly calm against her chest. She began humming the same melody from last night, and April's trembling eased. "Has she eaten?" Lori asked quietly. "She refuses," Mrs. Deborah said. "We've tried everything. She needs routine," Lori interrupted, not caring if it was rude. "Predictability. Small choices that give her control." She looked at David. "Do you have any fruit? Crackers? Things she can feed herself?" David nodded to Mrs. Deborah, who left with barely concealed disapproval. Lori shifted, settling cross-legged on the carpet with April in her lap. The child immediately repositioned herself, tucking her face into Lori's neck, one small hand gripping Lori's cardigan like a lifeline. "How much are you paying Mrs. Deborah?" Lori asked. David raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because she doesn't know how to talk to April. None of them do." Lori gestured around the pristine playroom. "This isn't a child's space. It's a showroom. Where are the messy art projects? The blanket forts? The stuff that makes kids feel like they can exist here? I gave her everything. You gave her things." Lori's tone softened. "That's not the same as space to be small and scared and messy." David stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Mrs. Deborah returned with a silver tray, sliced apples arranged in a perfect fan, crackers on a porcelain plate, water in a crystal glass. Lori almost laughed. Almost. "April," she whispered. "Are you hungry?" The child nodded against her shoulder. "Okay. Can you sit next to me? Just right here?" Lori patted the carpet beside her. April hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, she moved but kept one hand locked in Lori's shirt. Lori picked up an apple slice with her fingers, took a small bite herself. Sweet," April watched. Then, miraculously, reached for one. She ate it slowly, eyes darting between Lori and her father, as if afraid someone would take it away. David's voice came rough. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days." April ate 3 more slices, 4 crackers, drank half the water, and through it all, she never let go of Lori's shirt. "Why are you good at this?" David's question came an hour later, after April had finally relaxed enough to play. She sat on the carpet near Lori's feet, carefully stacking blocks the first time she'd touched any of the toys. According to Mrs. Deborah's shocked whisper, Lori watched April's small hands work, remembering other small hands doing the same thing. "I raised my nieces," she said quietly. "After my sister died." David went still. "How old were they?" 4 and 6, Mia and Sophie. The names still hurt. Car accident, drunk driver. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Lori's fingers twisted in her lap. "The girls were in the back seat. They saw everything." April's hands paused on a block. She didn't look up, but Lori could feel her listening that hyper-awareness traumatized children developed, always monitoring the emotional temperature of a room. "How long did you have them?" David asked. 3 years, until their father got out of rehab and fought for custody. Lori's voice cracked slightly. "He won. The court said blood family was better, even though he'd been absent their entire lives. Even though I was the one who—" She stopped. April had turned around, those dark eyes fixed on Lori's face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Lori whispered, just remembering. April crawled forward slowly, climbed into Lori's lap, and pressed her small hand against Lori's chest right over her heart, as if checking it was still beating. The gesture destroyed her. Lori wrapped her arms around April, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "You understand, don't you? You know what it's like when the world breaks." April nodded against her shoulder. Then did something that made the room stop breathing. She hummed, that same soft melody Lori had used. But now it was April offering comfort, the way she'd received it, giving back what had been given to her. David's voice came rough. "She's copying you. Children mirror what makes them feel safe," Lori managed. "It's how they learn to regulate their emotions when their own system is overwhelmed." April's small hand moved from Lori's chest to her face, patting gently the same gesture Lori had used on April yesterday. Testing, offering, connecting. "Hey, you," Lori whispered. "You're such a smart girl." April's lips moved, forming shapes without sound, trying to speak. The effort was visible in her furrowed brow, her concentrated expression. "It's okay," Lori said. "You don't have to talk. Being here is enough." But April kept trying, her mouth working around syllables that wouldn't come. Frustration tightened her small face. David leaned forward. April, baby, it's... April flinched. Just slightly. Just enough. David froze, and Lori watched something die in his eyes. He pulled back slowly, like he'd been burned. She's not afraid of you, Lori said quietly. She's afraid of losing you. There's a difference. Doesn't feel different. David stood abruptly, walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid beneath the black t-shirt, every muscle locked. She looks at me and sees the night her mother died. I was supposed to be in that car. It was meant for me. April's hand tightened in Lori's shirt. She knows that. David continued, his voice barely controlled. Some part of her knows. Mommy died because of Daddy's choices. Because of who Daddy is. David, you want to know why I need you here? He turned, and Lori saw the raw grief he usually hid behind violence and control. Because my daughter is terrified that if she loves me, I'll disappear too. And I don't know how to tell her I'm already gone. That the man she remembers, the one who did princess voices and built pillow forts, died in that explosion with her mother. The silence was suffocating. April made a small sound, not quite a whimper, but close. She pressed her face harder into Lori's shoulder, her small body starting to tremble again. Lori's anger surprised her. Stop, she said sharply. David's eyes snapped to hers. Stop making her grief about your guilt. Lori's voice shook. She's 3 years old. She doesn't need your self-destruction. She needs you to be here, present, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. You don't understand. I understand that grief is selfish. Lori stood, April clinging to her like a monkey. I understand that when you're drowning, it's easy to forget other people need you to swim. But she's watching you, David, every moment. Learning how to survive this by watching how you do it. David stared at her like she'd slapped him. You want to know why I'm good at this? Lori continued. Because I didn't have a choice. Mia and Sophie needed me to be okay even when I wasn't. They needed me to show them that broken things can still function, that grief doesn't have to mean giving up. April lifted her head from Lori's shoulder. Her eyes, red-rimmed and wet, moved between Lori and her father. Then she did something impossible. She reached out, one small hand extending toward David. Not far, not a full gesture, just fingers opening in his direction. An invitation, tentative, terrified, but real. David's breath caught. He moved forward slowly, dropping to his knees in front of them. His tattooed hand reached out, stopping inches from April's small fingers. Baby, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. April's fingers touched his, just barely. And for the first time since the explosion, father and daughter connected. The photograph appeared on David's phone at 11:47 p.m. He was in his office, surveillance feeds glowing across multiple monitors, when the message came through. Unknown number, no text, just an image. Lori, walking out of the restaurant. April asleep against her shoulder. Taken 3 days ago, the night everything changed. David's blood went cold. Someone had been watching. Someone inside his world knew about Lori, knew about April's attachment, knew exactly where to strike if they wanted to destroy him. He forwarded the image to Kozlov with 2 words, find them. The response came in under an hour. Photo uploaded to encrypted server. Accessed by multiple IPs. Boss, it's already spreading. David's fist slammed into the desk. Lori had been coming to the estate every afternoon for a week now. April smiled when she arrived. 8 full meals. Played with toys. Last night, she'd spoken her second word more when Lori was leaving, reaching out with desperate hands. Progress. Real, tangible progress. And now, she was a target. Lori didn't see the black SUV until it was too late. She was leaving her apartment Thursday morning, coffee in hand, already mentally planning activities for April, maybe finger painting today, or that singing game April seemed to like when the vehicle pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. A man in sunglasses, shaved head, neck tattoos that marked him as Volkov family. Laurie Harper. Not a question. Her coffee cup trembled. I don't... Pretty name. Pretty face. He smiled, and it was all teeth. Pretty target. The SUV sped away before she could breathe. Lori's phone was in her hand before she registered moving. She dialed the number David had made her memorize. He answered on the first ring. Lori. Someone just threatened me. Her voice cracked. Outside my apartment. Black SUV. He knew my name. Silence. Then, stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't go inside. I'm sending Kozlov now. David, what's happening? They know about you. His voice was steel over terror. They know you matter to April, which means you matter to me. which makes you leverage. The word hit like a fist. Leverage. I'm just a waitress, Lori whispered. Not anymore. Kozlov arrived in under 10 minutes with 3 other men. They swept her apartment professionally, efficiently, finding the listening device behind her bathroom mirror within 30 seconds. Lori's knees gave out. They'd been inside her home. While she slept, while she showered, while she'd called her mother last Tuesday, crying about whether she was doing the right thing. Pack a bag, Kozlov said, his accent thick. Essentials only. You're moving to safe house. I can't just leave. Miss Harper. He turned, and his expression was gentle despite the gun visible beneath his jacket. Men who threaten women outside their homes don't stop at words. You stay here, you die here, is simple. The safe house was a brownstone in a neighborhood Lori didn't recognize. Armed guards at every entrance, cameras on every corner, a prison designed to look like an apartment. David was already there when they arrived. I'm sorry. The words came out before she'd even set down her bag. I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have... Stop. He crossed the room in 3 strides. This isn't your fault. This is mine. I brought you into this world. I made you visible. I knew what you were. Lori's hands shook. I saw the guns, the guards. I'm not stupid, but April needs you alive. The bluntness of it silenced her. David pulled out his phone, showed her an image. This was sent to me last night. It's been distributed to every crime family from here to Boston. They know your face. They know your connection to April. And they know... He stopped, jaw tight. Know what? That you're the fastest way to make me vulnerable. Lori sank onto the couch. So what happens now? I hide here forever? I never see April again? She'll think I abandoned her. You're not abandoning her. David crouched in front of her, and for a moment the crime boss disappeared. What remained was just a desperate father. She's asking for you. Every hour. Mrs. Deborah tried to explain you were busy, and April screamed for 20 minutes straight, tore apart her room, clawed anyone who tried to calm her. Tears burned Lori's eyes. She thinks I left like her mother did. I know. David's voice cracked. That's why I'm moving you both here. Tomorrow. Full security detail. Armed guards. You'll stay together. You're putting a 3-year-old in a safe house? I'm protecting the only 2 people I... He stopped. Started again. The only 2 people who matter. The weight of those words settled between them. Lori thought of April's small hand in hers, that tentative trust, those careful smiles, the humming that had become their shared language. If I do this, she said quietly, if I stay in hiding with April, you have to promise me something. Anything. Find who's doing this. Find them and end it. Her voice hardened. Because I won't let April grow up afraid. I won't let her learn that loving people means losing them. David's eyes held hers. I'll burn this city down if that's what it takes. Good, Lori whispered, because she deserves to feel safe again. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps on stairs. Kozlov's voice. Boss, we have a problem. David stood slowly. What? The Volkovs aren't working alone. Someone inside leaked Lori's schedule. Kozlov's expression went dark. Someone in your house. The silence in the safe house was a living thing, thick and heavy with the ghosts of gunfire and whispered threats. April was finally asleep, her small body curled tightly against Lori's side on the oversized leather couch, one tiny hand fisted in the fabric of Lori's shirt. Even in sleep, she was anchoring herself. David stood at the reinforced window, his back to them, a silhouette of contained fury and grief against the bulletproof glass. The city lights glittered, a world of normalcy he could no longer touch. She asked for a story, Lori whispered into the quiet, her voice raspy with exhaustion. Not with words, she just pointed at the book. David didn't turn. She hasn't done that since. Before. I read The Very Hungry Caterpillar. She tapped the picture of the strawberry when I turned the page. I think it's her favorite. This small, mundane detail seemed to fracture something in the room. David's shoulders, usually a rigid line of power, slumped almost imperceptibly. They were going to take her, he said, the words low and raw. The same men who planted the bomb in Elena's car. They weren't just trying to kill me that night. They were creating an opportunity. They knew if Elena was gone, and I was incapacitated by grief, April would be vulnerable. A asset. A bargaining chip. Lori's breath caught. She tightened her arm around April, the child's warmth a stark contrast to the icy dread seeping into her own bones. This wasn't just random violence. It was a calculated, ongoing campaign to dismantle a man by destroying everything he loved. You can't possibly blame yourself for that. Who else? He finally turned, and the anguish in his eyes was terrifying. This wasn't the crime boss. This was a man flayed open. My choices built this world, Lori. My enemies. My wars. Elena died because she was my wife. April is a target because she is my daughter. Every smile she gives you, every moment of peace she finds, it's just a temporary ceasefire. And I am the one who signed the declaration of war. He walked toward them, his movements weary. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at his sleeping daughter. His hand, the one adorned with ink that spoke of violence and legacy, lifted as if to touch her hair. But he aborted the movement, his fingers curling into a fist. I look at her, and I see my failure. I see the night I couldn't protect her mother. I see the fear in her eyes every time I reach for her. His voice dropped to a shattered whisper. How do you be a father when your very presence is a trigger for your child's terror? Lori's heart ached. She saw it now, the prison he had built for himself. Walls of guilt, bars of remorse. You stop trying to be the boss with her, Lori said softly, holding his gaze. You don't have to fix it, David. You just have to be there in it with her. Even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. She doesn't want me there. She's afraid of losing you, Lori corrected, her voice firm. There's a difference. She pushes you away because in her 3-year-old mind, the people she loves vanish. Her mother left and never came back. If she doesn't love you, maybe you won't leave too. The logic of a traumatized child, heartbreaking in its simplicity. David stared at her, the truth of it dawning in his eyes. A soft sound escaped April's lips. A hum. The same gentle, wordless melody Lori had used to calm her. In her sleep, she was comforting herself with the tool she'd been given. David's composure finally broke. A single, silent tear tracked down his cheek, cutting through the facade of the untouchable kingpin. He looked from his humming daughter to the woman who had taught her how to find that small piece of peace. I don't know how to do this, he confessed, the admission costing him everything. You learn, Lori said, one breath at a time. You let her see you trying. You let her see you break, because she needs to know that breaking doesn't mean you're gone. As if on cue, April stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking in the dim light. She saw Lori first, and a flicker of safety returned to her face. Then her gaze shifted to her father, standing so close, his face wet with a vulnerability she had never seen. Instead of flinching, she went still. Watching. David held his breath. Slowly, carefully, Lori began to extricate herself. I'm just going to get a glass of water, sweetheart. I'll be right back. She gently pried April's fingers from her shirt and stood, giving David a look that was both a command and a plea. Stay, try. She moved to the kitchenette, giving them the illusion of privacy, her own body trembling with the weight of the moment. She heard the soft rustle of fabric as David lowered himself to his knees beside the couch, putting himself at April's eye level. Hi, baby, he whispered, his voice thick. April watched him, her dark eyes wide and unblinking. Daddy's here, he said, the words so simple, so fundamental, yet they seemed to hang in the air between them, fragile as glass. April's lower lip trembled. She looked toward the kitchen where Lori stood, then back at her father, seeking reassurance, finding only his raw, unguarded hope. Then, she did the impossible. She lifted her small hand, not in a reach, but in an offering. Her fingers uncurled, palm up, on the cushion between them. David's breath hitched. He looked at that tiny hand, a symbol of everything he thought he'd lost. With a reverence Lori had never seen in him, he slowly brought his own hand forward, his much larger, tattooed palm hovering just above hers. He didn't grab, he didn't take, he waited, and after a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, April moved her hand the final, impossible inch, and placed it gently in his. The contact was electric. David's eyes squeezed shut, his shoulders shaking with a silent, powerful sob. He didn't pull her close. He just held her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her small knuckles with a tenderness that shattered Lori's heart. April didn't smile. She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away. She let her father hold her hand, her trust a quiet, seismic shift in the fortified room. From the kitchen, Lori watched, tears streaming freely down her own face. This was the beginning. Not a fix, not a cure, but a beginning. The moment was shattered by the sharp buzz of David's phone on the countertop. Then Kozlov's heavy footsteps approached from the hallway. David didn't let go of April's hand. He just opened his eyes, the grief in them hardening into something cold and deadly. The father was still there, but the boss was re-emerging, summoned by the outside world. Kozlov appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Boss, we have a problem." David's voice was low, a dangerous rumble that promised violence. "What?" The graffiti at the restaurant was just the start. They hit her apartment building an hour ago. His eyes flickered to Lori. Her name was spray-painted on the wall, with a threat. Lori's blood ran cold. They knew where she lived. They knew her name. David finally, reluctantly, released April's hand. He stood, his entire frame radiating a terrifying, focused energy. He looked at Lori, his gaze sweeping over her to where April now sat up on the couch, watching them with renewed anxiety. "Pack what you need for April," he said to Lori, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're not going back there. You're both staying here." "David, this ends now," he cut her off, his voice absolute. "They have made it personal." He looked at Kozlov. "Get the car. We're going to pay the Volkovs a visit." As he strode from the room, the safe house no longer felt like a prison, but a bunker on the eve of a war. And Lori knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fragile peace they had just built was about to be tested by fire. The war council was held in the safe house living room, maps and tablets littering the coffee table where, hours before, a children's book had lain. David's voice was a low, continuous growl, strategizing with Kozlov and two other trusted lieutenants. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and impending violence. Lori sat on the floor with April in the adjoining play area, trying to build a block tower, but the child was listless. Her eyes kept darting toward the men, her small body tense with an awareness no 3-year-old should possess. Every time David's voice rose a fraction, she flinched. "We hit their shipping warehouse tonight," David said, jabbing a finger at a map. "No warnings. Maximum damage." "The internal leak," Kozlov started, "is being handled separately." David cut him off, his gaze flicking to Lori and April for a split second before hardening again. "I'll root out the rat myself." As if she understood the finality in his tone, April let out a soft, distressed whimper. The block tower tumbled from her limp hands. David's head snapped up. "What's wrong with her?" "She's scared, David," Lori said, keeping her voice deliberately calm. "The energy in this room is terrifying her." He dismissed her with a wave, turning back to the maps. "She's fine. She's safe here." But he was wrong. The fortress walls couldn't keep out the atmosphere of war he was cultivating. Lori saw the panic building behind April's eyes, a silent storm she had no words to express. The first explosion was a distant, muffled thump that vibrated through the floorboards. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the alarms blared, a deafening, high-pitched shriek that tore through the house. Chaos. Guards shouted, running past the doorway, weapons drawn. Kozlov slammed the metal shutters over the windows with a deafening crash, plunging the room into emergency lighting. "They found us," a voice yelled from the hall. "Front entry breach." David was on his feet, a gun in his hand, his face a mask of feral rage. "Kozlov, with me! You two, secure this room. No one gets in." "David, don't leave her," Lori cried, scrambling to her feet and pulling a trembling April into her arms. "I'm ending this," he roared, and then he was gone, vanishing into the cacophony of the hallway with Kozlov at his back. The two remaining guards took positions by the door, their bodies rigid. Gunfire erupted somewhere deeper in the house, pop, 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 horrifyingly close. April screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was swallowed by the alarms. She buried her face in Lori's neck, her little fingers digging in like claws. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. I've got you," Lori chanted, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She backed them into the farthest corner, sliding down the wall to make them a smaller target, cradling April's head. Another explosion. Closer this time. The lights flickered. One of the guards barked into his comms. "We need backup in the east safe room, now." A spray of automatic gunfire chewed through the door frame. One guard grunted and fell. The other returned fire, his shouts lost in the noise. In the chaos, the door swung open again. A figure stood silhouetted, not David, not Kozlov. One of the guards from the perimeter, his face pale. "The back exit! Now! They're flanking us." The remaining guard looked from Lori to his comrade. The boss said, "The boss is pinned down. It's now or we're all dead. Bring the girl." Terror was a cold fist around Lori's throat. She clutched April tighter, but the guard was already moving, hauling her to her feet. Come on! They burst into a smoke-filled hallway. The noise was overwhelming alarms, shouts, the deafening report of gunfire. They stumbled through the haze, the guard shoving them forward. A man appeared from a side door, and the guard fired without hesitation. The man dropped. Laurie screamed, shielding April's eyes. They rounded a corner toward a service exit. A sudden, violent impact sent their guard sprawling into the wall, slumping to the floor unconscious. The other guard, the one who had fetched them, turned. His face, once panicked, was now eerily calm. "Give her to me," he said, his voice flat. Laurie froze. The rat. She stumbled backward, tightening her grip on April, who was sobbing hysterically. "No. He's paying me a lot more than Poston is," the man sneered, stepping forward. "The kid's the prize. Don't make me hurt you." He lunged. Laurie twisted, taking the brunt of his grab on her shoulder, and kicked out wildly, connecting with his shin. He cursed, his grip loosening for a precious second. She tore free, sprinting back the way they came, her only thought to get away. She ducked through a shattered doorway, into a ruined kitchen, and out a blown-out window frame, glass crunching under her feet. She ran blindly into the cold night, across a manicured lawn, her breath sobbing in her chest. She didn't stop until the sounds of the battle faded, until she found herself in a narrow, dark alley behind a row of commercial buildings, the safe house a distant nightmare of flashing lights. She collapsed against a damp brick wall, gulping air, her entire body shaking. It was only then, in the sudden, comparative quiet, that she felt the terrifying lightness in her arms. April was gone. Her arms were empty. A wail of pure, unadulterated horror tore from Laurie's throat. She must have lost her grip in the struggle, in the frantic run. She'd been so focused on escape she hadn't felt the tiny weight slip away. "April!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the empty alley. "April!" There was no answer. Only the distant wail of sirens. Back at the safe house, David emerged from the smoke, his knuckles bloody, his eyes wild. The attackers were dead or fleeing. The breach was contained. His first, primal thought was the East Room. He shoved past his men, bursting through the damaged door. The room was empty except for his 2 fallen guards. Laurie was gone. April was gone. The world stopped. The breath left his body in a devastating rush. He stared at the empty space in the corner where he had last seen them, and a sound escaped him, a raw, animalistic roar of utter devastation. He fell to his knees, his gun clattering to the floor. "Find them!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Burn the whole city down. Find my daughter." Laurie ran, her lungs burning, her vision blurred by tears. She retraced her steps, her mind replaying every stumble, every turn. She had to find her. She had to. She skidded to a stop at the mouth of a different, smaller alley, one she must have passed. And there, huddled behind an overflowing dumpster, was a small, white shape. April, curled into a tiny ball, her face hidden in her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Laurie sobbed with relief, rushing forward and dropping to the ground. "April!" "Oh, thank God." The child didn't look up. A soft, broken sound was coming from her, a muffled, desperate whisper into the fabric of her dress. "Mama," she was crying, the word distorted by tears and snot. "Laurie, Mama, Laurie." She was calling for both of them, the mother she'd lost and the woman who had become her sanctuary. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Laurie wept, gathering the ice-cold child into her arms. She rocked her, pressing kisses to her hair. "I've got you. I'm so sorry. I've got you." It was there that David and his men found them minutes later, their convoy screeching to a halt at the curb. David vaulted out of the car, his face a harrowed mask of fear. He saw them, Laurie, on the dirty ground, clutching his daughter, both of them crying, covered in grime, but alive, whole. The devastating rage left him all at once, leaving him hollow and trembling. He stumbled toward them, falling to his knees before them. His hands reached out, hovering, afraid to touch, to break the miracle. Laurie looked up, her eyes meeting his. "She called for me," she whispered. That was the final blow. David Poston, the man who had built an empire on control, completely broke. He didn't reach for April first. His hand shot out, gripping Laurie's wrist, his hold desperate, almost painful. His head bowed, and his shoulders shook with silent, wrenching sobs. "I can't," he choked out, his voice shattered. "I can't lose either of you." The silence in the new safe house was different. The first had been a sterile bunker. This one, a nondescript apartment in a quiet building, was charged with the aftermath of shared terror. David had not let them out of his sight. He stood by the window, his posture not of a king surveying his domain, but of a sentinel guarding his only reasons for breathing. April was asleep on Laurie's lap on the couch, exhausted from her ordeal, one hand still clutching the fabric of Laurie's shirt. The other was tucked inside her father's large, calloused hand. He had not released it since they'd carried her inside. Laurie watched him over the top of April's head. The man who had broken down in the alley was gone, replaced by something colder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. The grief had been forged into a blade. It was the same man, David said, his voice low, not looking away from the window. The one who gave the order to bomb Elena's car. Dmitry Volkov. The name hung in the air. A death sentence. He was there tonight. Kozlov confirmed it. He wasn't just trying to take April for leverage. He was there to watch. David's jaw tightened. He wanted to see my empire crumble. He wanted to see me break. He saw you find us, Laurie whispered, remembering the raw devastation on his face. He saw that I have something left to lose, David corrected, his gaze finally cutting to her. That makes him more dangerous, but it makes me more dangerous too. He gently extricated his hand from April's, his touch lingering on her small fingers before he stood. He walked to the table and picked up a tablet, pulling up a grainy surveillance image. It showed a man with a sharp, cruel face and a scar cutting through his eyebrow, standing beside a black van several blocks from the first safe house. Dmitry Volkov, David said, handing the tablet to Laurie. He doesn't just want my territory. He wants my legacy. He wants to erase my bloodline. Taking April, it was never just business. It was personal. The cold, vicious truth of it settled in Laurie's bones. This wasn't a corporate takeover. It was a vendetta. And she and April were the central figures in it. So what do we do? She asked, her voice small. We stop waiting for him to make the next move. David's eyes were like chips of flint. I'm going to draw him out. Finish this. A soft sound from the couch made them both turn. April was stirring, her sleep restless. A nightmare. Her small face contorted, and a frightened whimper escaped her lips. Before David could move, Laurie began to act. She didn't shake her awake. She didn't speak loudly. She leaned down, her voice a soft, steady murmur, near April's ear. You're safe, April. You're with Laurie. Feel the couch under you? It's soft. Can you feel it? Listen to my voice. Just my voice. She began to hum, the same simple melody, a tether back to reality. April's breathing began to slow. Her clenched fists relaxed. She didn't wake, but she settled, the nightmare losing its grip, soothed by the anchor of Laurie's presence. David watched, mesmerized. It was a technique, a practiced one. You've done that before, he stated. Laurie looked up, her cheeks flushing slightly. With my nieces. After the accident, Mia had terrible night terrors. The doctors said to ground them, to use sensory details to pull them out of the panic, something they can feel, something they can hear. It usually worked. She was giving him tools, the same tools she used to build fortresses against the fear in his daughter's mind. In that moment, she was more valuable than any lieutenant, any weapon in his arsenal. Teach me, he said, the words stark and simple. Laurie blinked. What? Teach me how to do that. For her, it was the most vulnerable request he had ever made. Not an order, a plea. So, while April slept, Laurie taught him. She spoke in a low voice about using a calm, steady tone, about naming things in the room, about the power of a familiar, repetitive sound. He listened with the intense focus he usually reserved for planning an attack, committing it to memory. The next day, they practiced. When April became overwhelmed by a siren outside, instead of looming over her, David knelt. His voice, usually a command, was a forced, gentle rumble. You're safe, April. You're with Daddy. See the sunlight on the floor? It's making a square. Can you see it? April, who had been curling into Laurie, paused. She looked at him, then at the patch of light on the carpet. Her breathing hitched, but she didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just watched him, listening. It was a monumental victory. Progress was a fragile, budding thing. April began to use more sounds, stringing consonants and vowels together with purpose. W, for water. No, when Mrs. Deborah tried to bathe her without Laurie. She started to copy Lori's habits, the way she tilted her head, the specific rhythm of her humming, but the outside world was not done with them. The threats escalated. A bouquet of black roses was delivered to the restaurant where Lori used to work, her name on the card. A voicemail, distorted and cold, was left on David's secure line. "A pretty cage for a pretty bird. We'll find the key." They were playing with him, taunting him, letting him know there was no safe place. That night, David stood over April's makeshift bed, watching her sleep. Lori came to stand beside him. "They won't stop," he said, his voice hollow. "He's obsessed. He'll burn down the whole world to get to us." Lori wrapped her arms around herself. "So what's the plan?" He turned to her, his expression grim, final. "The plan is for you to take April and run. Kozlov has passports, money, a house overseas. You'll be safe there. You can have a life." The words felt like a physical blow. After everything, he was sending them away. "David, no. This is the only way," he hissed, careful to keep his voice low. "I can't fight a war and protect you at the same time. I need to know you're safe. Both of you. I need to know you're alive." "She'll think you abandoned her," Lori argued, her own fear sharpening her tone. "After everything, David. She'll think you left her like her mother was left." "It's better than her being dead," he shot back, his control snapping. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes blazing. "Don't you understand? If he gets his hands on her, what he'll do. If he hurts you to get to me." He shook his head, the words failing him. The thought was unendurable. Tears streamed down Lori's face. She understood the brutal logic. She understood the love that fueled this desperate, heartbreaking strategy. But she also knew the little girl sleeping a few feet away, a girl who had just started to reach for her father's hand. She looked at David, at the torment in his eyes, at the impossible choice he was making. She thought of April's whispered words in the alley. "Mama." Lori, a plea that had woven her irrevocably into the fabric of this broken family. She placed her hands over his where they gripped her shoulders, her touch surprisingly steady. "No," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "I made a promise to her, and to you." He stared at her, stunned. "I won't leave her," Lori whispered, her gaze unwavering. "Or you." The warehouse by the river was a decaying tomb, smelling of rust, stale water, and imminent death. David's intelligence had been good. This was where Dmitry Volkov was consolidating his stolen arms, the final piece of his move against the Postan Empire. David moved through the shadows, Kozlov a solid presence at his back, a dozen other men fanning out in the darkness. This was it, the endgame. He felt a cold clarity, the kind that only came when you had nothing left to lose. He had sent his heart away with an armed convoy. Lori and April were on their way to the airport, to a life of safety. The hollow ache of their absence was a fuel that burned cleaner than rage. He gave the signal. The assault was swift and brutal. His men poured into the warehouse, a tide of controlled violence. Muzzle flashes lit the cavernous space like strobes, freezing moments of terror and aggression. David moved with them, a predator unleashed, his focus singular. Find Dmitry. He found him on a metal gantry overlooking the main floor, a smug smile on his scarred face. "Postan!" Dmitry shouted over the gunfire. "I heard you lost your pet waitress. Did she finally realize she was sleeping with the enemy?" David didn't answer with words. He answered with bullets, charging up the metal stairs. The armored SUV never made it to the airport. A truck T-boned them 2 blocks from the safe house. A calculated, violent impact that slammed Lori against the door. The world spun. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the frantic shouts of the driver and the front seat guard as they returned fire through the shattered windows. They knew the route. The guard in the back with her yelled, shielding her and April with his body. "We have to move. To the fallback." The fallback was the old textile warehouse. It was the closest defensible position. They fled on foot, the guard half carrying her as she clutched a sobbing April. They burst through a side door into the overwhelming noise of the firefight. The guard shoved them toward a mountain of moth-eaten fabric bales. "Stay down," he ordered, before turning to join the fray. Lori crouched, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She huddled over April, making her body a shield, just as she had in the alley. The child's cries were muffled against her chest. "Shh, sweetheart, I've got you," she whispered, the words a desperate prayer. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, a voice slick with triumph. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Lori looked up. 3 of Volkov's men stood over them, their guns pointed. The one who had spoken, a hulking brute with a broken nose, grinned. "The boss will be very happy to see you," he said, reaching for her. On the gantry, David had Dimitri cornered. They were trading blows, a brutal close-quarters fight. David's knuckles were bloody, his lips split. Dimitri was bigger, fueled by a sadistic joy. "Your daughter has her mother's eyes," Dimitri taunted, blocking a punch. "I look forward to seeing the fear in them up close." The words were a detonation. David tackled him, driving him back against the railing. The metal groaned in protest. It was then, from his high vantage point, that he saw it. A scene unfolding on the main floor below that stopped his heart. Lori, on her knees, curled over his daughter, her arms wrapped protectively around April's small body. 3 men surrounding them. One was grabbing her shoulder, trying to pry her away. She was fighting, not with skill, but with a feral, desperate strength, twisting her body, using her weight to keep herself between the guns and the child. Her face was a mask of pure terror, but her body did not yield. She was the only wall standing between his daughter and the abyss. The image seared itself into his brain, the waitress in her simple clothes, kneeling in filth, shielding a Mafia princess with her own life. It was the exact posture from the first night in the restaurant, but now magnified 1,000 times in its stakes and its savage beauty. Something in David Poston broke, and something else was born. A sound ripped from his throat, a roar of such primal, unadulterated fury that for a split second, the gunfire below seemed to stutter. He forgot about Dimitri. He forgot about the war. There was only the impossible woman and his child. He shoved Dimitri away with a raw burst of strength, sending him stumbling. Without a second glance, David vaulted over the gantry railing. He dropped 20 feet, landing with a roll that sent agony shooting through his ankle. He ignored it. He was already moving, a force of nature, a father possessed. He didn't shoot the men. He reached them. He grabbed the first man by the head and snapped his neck with a sickening crack. The second turned, his eyes wide with shock, and received the barrel of David's gun in his throat before a single shot silenced him forever. The third, the brute, released Lori and raised his weapon. He never got the chance to fire. David was on him, a whirlwind of violence. He disarmed him, broke his arm, and drove him to the ground, pounding his face into a pulp with his bare fists. Over and over, long after the man had stopped moving. The immediate area fell silent. His men, stunned by his descent, had cleared the space. David was breathing in ragged, bloody gasps. He turned. Lori was still on her knees, shaking violently, still wrapped around April. Her eyes were wide, staring at the carnage he had wrought, at the man drenched in the blood of his enemies. He stumbled toward them, falling to his knees in front of them. His hands, slick with blood, reached out, hovering, unsure, monstrous. And then, from within the safety of Lori's arms, a small sound emerged. Not a cry, not a whimper. A word. A full, clear, terrified sentence. "Don't hurt her." April was staring at her father, her little body trembling, but her voice was sharp with a protective fury that mirrored his own. She was shielding Lori. From him, the world stopped. David stared at his daughter, at the fierce, loving defiance in her eyes. She wasn't afraid he would hurt her. She was afraid he would hurt Lori. The last of the monster receded. The rage evaporated, leaving him utterly, completely broken. The gun slipped from his bloody fingers and clattered to the concrete. He looked from April's fierce little face to Lori's tear-streaked one. He saw the trust there, the unbreakable bond that had formed in the crucible of his violent world. His shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. He had won. He had slaughtered his enemies. But here, on his knees, he had never felt more defeated. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't stand to command his men. He just stayed there, kneeling in the aftermath, his head bowing as the sounds of the final mop-up operations echoed around the 3 of them. The crime boss, the waitress, and the child who had finally found her voice. The silence in the penthouse was soft, a living thing woven from peace and exhaustion. The war was over. Dmitry Volkov was dead, his organization scattered to the winds. The betrayals within David's own house had been ruthlessly excised. The city, for the first time in years, was truly his. But the man who stood on the balcony, looking out over the skyline he now controlled without contest, felt no triumph. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean by grief and violence, and the terrifying, fragile hope that had taken root in the ashes. He turned from the view and looked inside. The great room was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The sterile perfection was gone. A bright, Messy finger painting was taped to the glass wall, swirling blobs of blue and yellow. A lopsided blanket fort, constructed from expensive cashmere throws and dining chairs, took up one corner. The place was no longer a showroom. It was a home. Inside the fort, lit by a soft lantern, was his entire world. April lay fast asleep, her head pillowed on Laurie's lap. She wore dinosaur pajamas, and one small hand was fisted in the hem of Laurie's simple cotton sweater. Her breathing was deep and even, the faint, contented hum of her dream, a melody David now knew by heart. Laurie was leaning back against a cushion, her eyes closed, one hand resting protectively on April's back. She looked tired, but the lines of constant fear had softened from her face. In the quiet intimacy of the fort, she wasn't a waitress or a pawn in a mafia war. She was an anchor, a sanctuary. He remembered the aftermath of the warehouse, the doctors checking them over. April, clinging to Laurie's neck, had refused to let go, her first spoken words still hanging in the air between them. Don't hurt her. He had not known how to bridge the chasm he had carved with his own bloody hands. It was Laurie who had built the bridge. Later that night, in a temporary safe room, she had taken a washcloth, wet it, and without a word, had begun to gently wipe the dried blood from his hands. He had flinched, ashamed of the violence etched into his skin. She wasn't afraid of you, David, Laurie had said softly, her touch firm and sure. She was afraid for me. She loves you enough to protect what you love. The simple truth of it had shattered him. He had looked at his daughter, watching them from the bed, her thumb in her mouth. I don't know how to come back from what I am, he had confessed, his voice raw. You don't come back, Laurie had replied, meeting his gaze. You move forward, you build something new, for her. And so, he had tried. He watched them now, his chest tight with an emotion so profound it threatened to undo him. He moved silently across the room and knelt at the entrance of the fort. The sight of them there, safe and at peace, was a victory greater than any territorial conquest. Laurie's eyes fluttered open. She saw him and offered a small, tired smile. She was asking for the fox story again, she whispered. We only made it halfway through. David nodded, his throat too tight for words. He reached out, his hand now clean, the nails neatly trimmed, and brushed a dark curl from April's forehead. Her skin was warm. She didn't flinch. She sighed in her sleep and nestled deeper into Laurie's lap. He didn't pull away. He stayed there, on his knees, just watching them, learning the contours of this new, impossible peace. Laurie shifted slightly, gesturing to the space beside her inside the fort, an invitation. Hesitantly, David crawled in. The space was cramped, the ceiling of blankets brushing his head. He settled beside her, his large frame making the fort feel even smaller, safer. He leaned his back against the same cushion, his shoulder brushing Laurie's. They sat in silence, the setting sun casting long, golden shadows through the fabric walls. The only sounds were April's soft breaths and the distant, muffled hum of the city far below. This was it. This was what he had been fighting for without ever knowing it. Not power, not control. This quiet, this connection. I spoke to my mother today, Laurie said, her voice barely a whisper. Told her I was safe, that I'd found a good job, a family that needs me. David looked at her profile, at the way the light caught the gentle curve of her cheek. Is that what we are? He asked, the question vulnerable and direct. Laurie looked down at April, then at the messy painting on the wall, then finally at him. Her brown eyes held his, filled with a gentle certainty that had disarmed him from the very first night. Yes, she said simply. The word settled in his soul, a balm on every old wound. As if sensing the shift, April stirred. She blinked awake, her eyes unfocused with sleep. She saw Laurie first, and a smile touched her lips. Then she turned her head and saw her father, sitting right beside them, inside their fort. For a long moment, she just looked at him. There was no fear, no tension, just a quiet, sleepy assessment. Then, she did what she hadn't done since before the explosion. She lifted her arms toward him, a silent, trusting request. Up. A sob caught in David's throat. He looked at Laurie, seeking permission, reassurance. She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She's asking for you, David. With a reverence that bordered on worship, he slid his hands under his daughter, lifting her from Laurie's lap and cradling her against his chest. April immediately tucked her head into the hollow of his neck, her small body molding against his, warm and heavy with sleep. One of her hands came up to rest on his cheek. He held her, rocking gently, his eyes closed, feeling the beat of her heart against his. He felt Lori's hand come to rest on his arm, a steady, grounding pressure. He was not the man he had been. The man who did princess voices and built pillow forts had not died in the explosion. He had been buried, waiting for the right person to help him dig his way out. The city outside was his. But this small, warm space filled with blankets and trust and the soft breath of his daughter, this was his empire. No one could handle the mafia boss's daughter until the waitress healed them both. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.